And now, a workshop of the McAllen City Commission. All workshops are open to the public in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act. These workshops allow for detailed staff presentations.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's workshop. And we have a few items. First, any questions regarding the meeting?
No, Mayor.
Any questions?
No,
Nothing. Second item, presentation and grant administration.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Commission. My name is Julia Lash. I am the Director of the Grant Administration Department. With me today is Ms. Priscilla Avila. She is the Assistant Director of the Grant Administration Department, and she will be providing a brief overview of our grants division.
Hello, good evening. As Julia mentioned, I will be talking about our department. Just to give you a little bit of a background, our department is comprised of two divisions. We have the Community Development and the Grant Administration. This presentation will focus on the Grant Administration side. If you all recall, Julia has come up a few times here to talk about different components of the Community Development, which is to include the action plan and some of the different programs that they offer. To further explain, the grant administration side works very similarly in that we provide services through different grant programs. The main difference is that the recipient of these grants are the internal city departments instead of outside agencies for the community. So just to talk about a little bit about our mission and vision, which you can all see here, basically our department is responsible for the coordination and the administration of all of the City of McAllen grants and all of the duties required to meet the compliance of these grants. We basically develop and coordinate grant-funded programs for the city by reviewing literature dealing with funds available through the different projects that we apply for. We then determine the feasibility of each of the projects, and then we submit grant applications. After we have been awarded, we also manage all of the compliance in-house. Through this process, we meet with the key personnel, which includes the different departments that are going to be doing the implementation of the grants, and we coordinate the evaluation and the monitoring of the programs. Some of the goals and objectives can be seen here. Basically, the priorities and responsibilities that our department has is that we have to identify the needs of the community. These needs are expressed through our departments. We work alongside police department, fire department, parks, engineering, et cetera. So whenever we compile a grant application, we have to basically do a project scope depending on the need. Within this scope, we have to ensure that we have feasible timelines that will outline how the period of performance will be basically evaluated at the end of the grant. We then determine the eligibility of each of the grants, and we execute the grant application. In addition to these objectives, we also establish communications with the City Commission, with the City Manager's Office, and other municipal departments. To give you an example, sometimes neighboring cities like Mission or Edinburgh want to apply for a grant that needs external partners. So to make our application stronger, we have that contact directly, and we ensure that we effectively compile a grant application that is more competitive in order to receive those funds. When talking about our department, we like to divide these amongst the three priorities listed here. To give you a small background on each one, for research, this is basically the phase where we identify a need within the community or the departments. We search every possible funding source out there. We prepare a proposal, and we ultimately submit the application. Through this, we determine the eligibility of each of the grants, and we find a good fit for each of the projects. That'll come in through either a federal or a state or a foundation application. When reviewing all of this information, we also have to take into consideration the fiscal requirements of every grant application. That is the amount of funding available per the solicitation, the total project cost that we're going to have for our projects, and any match requirements, if any. Then we get to the development side. The development phase is where we work closely with the implementing department. This is where we schedule meetings, conduct any site visits. We have to interview the people who are going to be involved in carrying out the grant. So the main priority is to familiarize ourselves with the scope of the grant. Although we are writing and developing the grant in-house, we are dealing with subject matter experts, which include, the different departments. So getting to know as much detail as we can for each application will help strengthen our proposal. And then we get to the management part. This is where we have a grant that has been awarded, and this is where we carry out the compliance to effectively manage and ensure all of the grant requirements that we have been basically going into contract with are going to be dealt with in the matter that they reserve. So this is where we review the contract and we do a formal acceptance of the grant agreement. So just to give you a little background here, this is what I talked about right now. This is how we like to see the grant process. We divide it between pre-award and post-award, so there you can see kind of like the timeline that we follow. When we talk about the pre-award side, I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is kind of like the process that we follow in-house. But just to give you an example, the way that we go after a grant is that we have different scenarios. The first one is when a specific department will follow up with us and let us know. For example, the fire department can say, we need funding for X amount of dollars to purchase new vehicles or a mobile command center or equipment for our firefighters. So in that scenario, we know the need of the department, of the community, and that is where we conduct our research. After we find something feasible for the department, given the total project cost and any match requirements, we then create what we call a GO form, which is a grant opportunity form. When we do our research, we have to go through extensive notice of funding availability forms, which include a lot of details of the contract. To break it down for them, we create this form further explaining all of the details of the grant, which include the source of funding, what the projects have to look for, the different guidelines that we have to follow, and the period of performance. And of course, most importantly, the deliverables, because we have to be sure that we're going to be able to follow on all of the deliverables at the end of the period of performance. The second scenario, which I talk about, is that while we're conducting our research, we come across a project or a grant that could be a good match for a department. When that happens, we create the goal form that I explained earlier, and we send it to the department or multiple, because sometimes we do have grants that could be a good match for multiple departments. So once we do that, we reach out to them, let them know, and if they want to pursue, we begin the development process. So then we get the award. What happens next? So when that happens is that we have to do extensive compliance reviews of the contracts and the agreements that we're getting in. We compile fiscal and programmatic compliance. We work with our finance department to ensure all of the fiscal reports are due and that they're completed, and we do the programmatic reporting in-house as well in our department. We also develop any city commission post-award items, whether, as you all know, every time we apply for a grant, we do have to bring it to city commission for approval. So whenever we do get the award, we also bring that to city commission for approval to formally accept the award. Some grantors do require that. If they don't, we don't. But we also make any amendments. So if we get a different amount of award than we initially applied for, we also take it to City Commission for approval. Aside from that, we also work with the Office of Management and Budget to request all of the accounts that we're going to be using, especially if the grants require a match. Like I mentioned, we do a compliance and monitoring review. This is a process where we do the official handoff from the development side, which is from our grant writers, to our compliance officer. When this happens, we meet with the departments and we make sure we delineate all of the grant stipulations and contract, and then we formally explain to them what the deliverables will be and what the expectation from the implementing department will be. We also provide a grant status report. This is basically a list that we do internally through a grant management system, where we also include the active logs, meaning the active grants that we have right now. You all can reference right now in the packet that I've provided for you. Those are all of the active grants that we have right now. Those are broken down by department, by amount, and by grant proposals. So In addition to this, we also keep track of grants under review, meaning the grants that we have applied for and that we're waiting to hear back. And we also like to track the grants that were not awarded. This helps us maintain a history of the grant applications we have submitted. And finally, we coordinate all of the grant closeouts, meaning that we compile all of the final reports with the agency and we update our internal records. This is just an example of some of the grant funding sources that we have. Grants come from either the state, the Office of the Governor, Office of the Attorney General, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and we also have federal grants, the Department of Transportation, FTA, EPA, agencies like that. We also have grants from foundations. That could be Bank of America, HEB, Lowe's, Valley Baptist, just different foundations that we work with and that we have established relationships with. Now, it's very important identifying these sources because every grantor is different. They all have different priorities. They all have different missions and visions depending on the fiscal year. So it's important to get familiarized with all of these funding sources to know what would be a good fit for our projects. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but here are just some of the examples of grant-funded projects that we've had in the past. Most recently, we had the $25 million grant from the Department of Transportation to help with the expansion of the Anzalduas Bridge. And in 2022, we had about $15 million in grants for the police department, and that includes the tag allocations that we've had. Just to give you an idea of our portfolio, we currently have 47 active grants, and we're managing about 110 million grants right now. To give you another example, just in the last fiscal year, we brought in $20 million in funding, and this fiscal year up to now, we have around $17 million. In addition, in addition to handling all of the grant applications, we also serve in other functions. We assist departments with different designations and certifications for the city. These are some examples. And lastly, we also manage the Year in Review website. As you all know, the yearly State of the City event is accompanied with a website where we highlight all of the year's milestones that we've hit. So all those are highlighted in this website, which we handle. So we track all of the yearly goals and highlights of the year so the mayor can announce them in that event. So at this moment, I'll entertain any questions.
Questions?
Got a couple questions. The grant awards document, one of them shows McAllen ISD Discovery Center, $12 million. So that's been awarded, right? And that's
Correct.
going to be able to be used by not only the residents, but also the students, I'd imagine.
Correct,
Right?
yes.
Okay. That's a great award of monies that I guess the district and the city will get to take advantage of, right?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
The other question, as far as agencies, like let's say IMAS or Heritage Center, are they able to come to the Grant Administration Office and ask for help in looking for potential grants? And if they are, do you provide them with information that they can then follow up on, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we've actually had that working relationship in the past with the McAllen Heritage Center. That's one example. So basically, while we won't be conducting the research, for them directly, we do help and advise them with providing the resources that we use. So we do use several portals and different websites that filter out the grants to fit our needs. We do share that information with them, and we have in the past.
Sounds good.
Sorry, and to add to that, Commissioner, sometimes, as she mentioned earlier, when our grant writers are doing research for, let's say, a department and they come across a grant opportunity for, let's say, one of these nonprofits, we do forward that information to them.
Nice.
We do also let them know that if they want to write the proposal, we can review it to just kind of, give it a glance and make sure that they have a strong proposal.
That's great.
How many people do you have on the research part? How many people do you have on that? Only
So
two?
we have 2 grant development specialists, which are basically the grant writers, and currently we have 1 compliance officer overseeing the compliance part.
Well, and my next question was, how many people do we have in monitoring and compliance?
Just 1.
Just one.
Just one. How large is the department?
Currently, in the grants division, we have 5.
Okay. It's, yeah. I'll leave it at that and I'll study it.
Any other questions?
Kind of leading off where Commissioner Denia started, would it be fair to say that most of the projects are initiated or spearheaded by the departments?
Yes, for the most part. So what we typically see is that on a fiscal year basis, we have a lot of repeating grants. So we know typically that the police department will apply for the TAG grant for Operation Stone Garden. So we do have several that happen throughout the year and we reapply each year. So the departments know, to keep us in the loop of that.
And then does your department look at opportunities where there are nonprofits, where we initiate the conversation and go out to them?
Yes, so whenever we're doing our research, like Julia mentioned, and if we are not an eligible entity to apply, we do forward that. So if they're a good fit for an agency, we forward that information to them.
No, overall, really good job. More of just a comment because it's on top of mind. Last week I read a summary of the Senate Finance Committee, and one of the things that the director of parks mentioned specifically is that they were going to be focused heavily on certain areas, and he mentioned the RGV specifically.
Awesome.
And so I think they're going to do a tremendous amount of funding for parks. Now, he was talking very large-scale parks, and he to some extent excluded what he called city parks.
Okay.
But I know they were making some comments back and forth, and they alluded to the fact that either cities can get together and figure something out, right, smaller cities, or maybe it'd be worthwhile for things like the Nature Center, Quinta, the new Kepler Park, might be avenues or money available for that, because they definitely said they were going to be prioritizing areas in Texas, and RGV was mentioned right after that.
So to follow that, whenever we do our research, we do keep up to date with all of the trends. So we do follow all of the appropriations, the Senate bills, everything that's coming out on a yearly basis. We have to be aware of what the priorities are for that specific year. So yeah, that's important to keep in mind when applying.
Any other questions? If not, ladies, thank y'all very much.
Thank
I think
you.
y'all do an excellent job.
Thank you.
Y'all so much. Next item.
Sir, Mayor, Commissioners, the next item is the airport terminal capacity study update, and then the parking rate schedule that we talked about at the last meeting, I believe.
Mayor, Commission, good afternoon. As you may recall, we brought the terminal capacity study here at the last workshop to get your concurrence with moving forward with the funding plan. This is a team that helped us with the funding plan. You remember Casey Nowicki with SCH, and we got John DeCoster with DCOM. So I'm going to pass it over to John to present some of the information.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon. When we started this project, as you've seen so far, it's a substantial project for the city of McAllen. When we looked at it, we wanted to make sure that we had certain principles that we followed as we looked at the financing plan. First and foremost was to make sure that there was no tax levy assessed in order to fund this program. Many airports around the country that are parts of cities or counties tend to rely on that. We did not. So the funding plan does not include that. We will have to issue debt, obviously, but we're looking at the debt as being backstopped by airport revenues and not any kind of general obligation. We also wanted to make sure that we maximize the use of grants, whether it's state or federal, and so that's built into the plan. Very importantly, we also did not want to burden the airlines with a whole bunch of debt because of this program. You guys have been very competitive, been very effective at getting new service here. The last thing we want to do is raise the airlines' rates and charges to the point where it's no longer profitable serving McAllen. We are not tapping the fund balance that exists today. We've, as Jeremy and the team have worked together for the past few years, coming up with a very aggressive non-airline revenue program In other words, parking, concessions, rental cars, et cetera. We will continue to do that. We've made some great strides in bringing our revenue from those sources up. So we're really going to be looking at using those incremental new sources because of the additional passengers and activity to fund that. Passenger facility charges it's a $4.50 charge that's assessed to each ticket by the federal government. It's to be used for capital programs. So we'll be, in projects of this magnitude, it's not unusual at all to have the airport leverage PFCs, or the passenger facility charges. So they'll float bonds, and then they'll be backed by the passenger facility charge revenue and not any of their obligations. So we wanted to make sure that we're using PFCs, leveraging them to pay for a portion of the debt, but not also extending that out to an unreasonable period. All of our tenant projects will be funded by the tenants. It's very standard practice in the industry. When the airlines have their offices, they fund the improvements. When food and beverage and retail build new locations, they fund their improvements, et cetera. So we're planning that into the program also. And then lastly, we wanted to break down the project elements to make sure that if things happen that we do not anticipate, which we can pretty much guarantee, that we've got an ability to react to that without having to crash the whole program. So with that, I'll turn it over to Casey.
So just touching on the rough expansion here that we went over when we were here 2 weeks ago presenting the expansion plan that was the result of the study. The graphics there show the 2 floors of the terminal, and just as a reminder for everybody, there is a mix of renovation as well as expansion. So the area that's shown in purple is expansion, and then all of the green areas is renovation. So you can see in addition to the expansion that's needed, there's quite a bit of renovation included as well. So of the total project areas, about 94,000 square feet is expansion, but we also have about 71,000 square feet of renovated space. And then we have the cost estimates that we shared a couple weeks ago as well. Again, these are just kind of rough order of magnitude costs at this point with some contingencies built in as well. The 2 additional kind of items there at the bottom are just showing some areas where there are project elements that could easily be removed if there wasn't enough funding to pursue those items.
As far as the potential sources of funding specifically, we're talking about congressionally directed spending or community project funding, more commonly known historically as earmarks, which we've already gotten 1 grant for $7.47 million, which will pay for the eligible portion of the design. And so all we have to do is get our project to that point of eligibility to prove to the FAA so that they can actually release the funds, and we can use that on the front end to pay for the design. And we'll continue to pursue other congressionally directed spending or community fund project funding, i.e. earmarks. We'll continue to pursue further earmarks as time goes on through the term of the project. We'll also be using FAA entitlement money, which is the amount of money that the airline tax generates and McAllen gets each year guaranteed based on the level of activity, and pursue also discretionary grants, which are awarded each year based on surplus funds that might be retained by the FAA, and we'll be in a good position because we'll have the design fully completed, and they usually look for what they refer to as shovel-ready projects to grant those. So we'll be in good shape on that side. As I mentioned before, we'll have tenants fund their own build-out. We'll take care of the shell. The tenants will do the build-out. Passenger facility charges, as I mentioned before, we'll use them to the degree possible, but not hamstrung the airport with too much leverage in the PFCs. And then the debt, as I mentioned before, the debt that would be funded that's not backed by PFCs will be funded by the airport's incremental revenue generation from non-airline sources. The only thing that's been contemplated potentially is if there is an enhancement project for the entrance area. There has been some discussion that might be funded through some grant through the city. Casey, next.
So as John mentioned, there's several discretionary grant sources that the airport will be seeking to help fund this project through the FAA. We don't know exactly what, those funding packages are going to look like at this point, but we were able to really leverage the information that's available on past grants that have been issued to kind of know what is a realistic grant that the FAA would likely issue to an airport the size of McAllen for this particular type of project. So we have built kind of theoretical funding packages that align with something that is realistic that the FAA would issue as far as a size of grant. So you can see here we've put together kind of a tentative funding plan for the terminal that includes the first item is the terminal design with that earmark funding for about the $7.4 million that has already been announced, as well as 3 funding packages to be released by the FAA that the airport would apply for that are competitive. And they range, in value depending on what the FAA would be able to bring to the table in a given kind of grant award cycle. There's also the apron design and construction. That's the concrete apron area where the aircraft will park. That is eligible for a different pot of money within the FAA. So we're listing that separately just to kind of track that different grant source and the likely kind of amount that the FAA would bring to the table. I think this came up 2 weeks ago in the presentation, but most of the eligible space is eligible for 90% FAA funding, and some of the grant programs will actually fund up to 95%. So it does depend on the funding source, but a lot of good opportunity to pursue.
As I mentioned previously, one of the principles of this was not to put the burden on the airlines. On the next slide, you'll see the expense per enplanement. You'll see through this entire time, this 10-year forecast, that the expense to the airlines actually is flat. Typically what happens when you see projects like this is that at the point of the space opening up, there's a huge spike, and then as activity continues to build, that spike will come down. We've funded this aggressively to make sure that didn't happen and we continue our competitive advantage with the airlines. The revenue per enplanement down below, you'll also see the benefit of the aggressive non-airline revenue programs we have, as well as the growth and how much of an impact that has on it when we start talking about all the additional rental cars, parking, et cetera, that will come with this, which is also why we'll be addressing the parking rates tonight. So as you can see, that amount is going to be very integral to being able to fund the program as we see it. Should also note that we have non-airline revenue today in calculating the airline rates and charges. This does not tap that. That's still secure, so it's not like we're taking from one pot and putting it in there. This is all incremental. As an example, on the next slide, you'll see we don't know what the interest rates are going to be, but we do anticipate about $27 million of having to be funded by local airport revenue, GARBs. Just to give you an order of magnitude, it's between 5 and 6%. That commitment would be approximately from $1.9 million to $2.3 million, depending upon the rate and the term we put it out there for. And as you might recall from the previous slide, we're looking at incremental revenue early on at about $2 million going up to $6.3 million. So we'll even continue to have a little bit of a gap as we continue to grow. The passenger facility charge projections, also to give you an idea, this is the 450 charge. And you'll see as the passengers grow with the opening of the new concourse, that will be also showing a significant increase in PFCs, which will be used to pay down that debt. Also, we'll be forecasting our application thus according to that plan. As we mentioned before, if things happen we do not anticipate, which we can guarantee, there are different things we can implement in the event that happens. The design, we'll have the design in its entirety from the get-go. Then we can start value engineering to make sure that we're using smart practices. We'll get our feedback from our airline partners to make sure if there's things that we don't need to do that they don't want to fund, that we'll step back and look at those. We can defer or downsize the renovation. We will continue to pursue aggressive non-airline revenue sources. A number of our bigger contracts have been recently renewed, but they'll also renew in the early years of this expansion. So we'll be able to take another shot and bring those contracts up to the then new industry standard. We can increase our leveraging in PFCs. I mentioned before that we're trying not to leverage out too far into the future, but if we get to the point of there's a value commitment that we think is necessary in order to achieve the project the way we want it to be, that we do have the ability to extend our PSC collection period to fund that. If we had to, we could include some debt in the rates and charges. We can do that according to the airline use and lease agreement, but we're going to try and use that as a last course. And then we could defer portions of the project if something were to happen and we don't. For instance, as Casey mentioned, there are a number of areas that are being renovated, and if we just don't have the money, maybe we table the renovations for a while, and as monies grow or become available, we do it at a later time. And then we'll continue, as we mentioned before, to continue to go after every available grant that's out there. Summary, we believe that the financing plan is a very conservative but very aggressive financing plan that's achievable. We've seen some airports where they assume the PFC is going to go from $4.50 to $6. We aren't assuming any of that. So we're dealing with what we know. We do not, as you saw and I've said before, we do not want to place an undue burden on the airlines. We want to keep them growing here as they are and be able to seek more service. That's been very aggressive in Jeremy's part. There are alternatives if we have to kind of change course and do a right instead of a left sometimes. And we think with the design, the way we'll have it, we'll be able to do that very consciously and very quickly. And we'll have flexibility to, one of the things that this planned also, it still leaves capacity for Jeremy to do other capital projects at the airport. If things happen outside of the terminal, he still is going to have capacity to do that from the various sources that he has today. And if we have to change, we can modify it and still be able to achieve our financial capability through this project and achieve the full funding as we anticipate it.
Thank you. So today the recommendation is that with the funding plan that we presented today, wanted to get your consensus to keep moving forward. Again, looking at the type of procurement process with the CMAR, getting a consultant on board for the design, which you've already given us the go-ahead, which we're moving forward with that. Obviously, at the beginning, you want to have a contractor on board to be able to package these things as funding becomes available, and I think that's the aggressive part of going after that federal funding for part or a good portion of the project.
Questions?
Yes, quick. On the slide, it says passenger facility charge projections. On the row that says percentage enplane passengers paying PFCs, who are those enplane passengers not paying that 9%?
The PFC applies to the first two segments of every trip. So if you have someone who's starting in Bangor, Maine, going to New York, going to Dallas, coming to here, we'd fall off and we would not be the PFC, collect PFCs for that.
I see, okay. And then with regards to the PFC rate, when was the last time that the rate was adjusted to 450?
I think I was a young man.
Not too long ago.
Not too long ago, huh?
Yeah, by legislation, we cannot go above the 450.
Right, the
That's
450 is the max,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Is there anything out there from articles, the pundits that think that'll ever be increased in the next 5 to 6 years?
There's been a lot of push for it, but it hasn't gone anywhere.
Happen, all right. And then, that's it.
Well, there is a lot of time-sensitive areas that I know if when we start this construction going, it's going to have to be done because we're looking at the internals terminal, and then we're doing some expansions outside of the terminal also.
Yes, sir.
So, keeping up and trying to do it in which, people can get in and out, planes can get in and out. I mean, it is absolutely, how are we going to be able to manage that, and are we planning to do anything else, while the construction is going on?
Yeah, historically, I mean, that's been a primary goal in any of the development that we do in the terminal. Any construction project, we either do it at night, we do it when, there's a way to keep our activity going. Again, that would be during the design phase where we would determine that. But obviously, that would be front and center, front of mind for any of the design team whenever we put any of this activity together. In addition to that, if you see the new concourse going off to the west, that's the reason that we're going off to the west, because of the fact that we want to keep those gates available to get aircraft in and out.
Yeah, I see that.
Yes, sir.
So that growth, most of our growth is gonna go to the west.
Correct.
So it won't bother the existing terminal other than revamp it and do some,
Yes, sir.
yeah. Yeah, my concern, we're gonna have parking issues that we're dealing with also. We have the runway and the expansion over there by 10th Street, that we're looking at doing things there, and we're doing the terminal renovations all at the same time.
Yeah, I think the short-term needs are the terminal. I mean, we are feeling the pinch. We've run out of a lot of space. We're already above capacity on a lot of space. The runway's in pretty good condition. Operationally, we don't have many delays. We are at about 70 to 80,000 operations a year, and we can uphold up to about 110,000 operations a year. So we're in good shape as far as the runway is concerned and the pavement quality as well. But we'll continue to work and prioritize those things. But I think first and foremost, that terminal is growing. And as far as parking, we have another part of the presentation for the rate structure.
It's all because of growth, and that's what,
Growing pains.
those are the growing pains. But they're good.
Okay, any other questions? Did you have another part?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So the parking rate schedule that we have, as many of you know, probably every other weekend it's closed for 2 to 3 days at a time. The long term, and we got to open up the overflow. The overflow is used for employees as well. So we got probably about 150 stalls for the public on that. So right now, 65% of our transactions are between 0 and 2 hours, and about 5% of our revenue. And then 22% of our transactions are in the time frame of 48 to 72 hours, which is really our traveler, and about 80% of our revenue. So we're kind of upside down on the rate schedule for the parking lot. And so what we had kind of put together was some proposed changes to that rate schedule. You'll kind of see on the, you'll see just a quick inventory. On the long term, we got about 820 stalls, I'm sorry. In the short term, we got about 231. The employee overflow lot, about 306, for a total of just over 1,200 spaces. You can see on the next slide that we got about 1.8, more or less, in parking revenue. Daily transactions we have, for the year, we got over 200,000 transactions. Average revenue per transaction is about $9. So when we broke down the summary of the time blocks, you can see where we're upside down. You're looking at the percentage of the transactions at about 65% in year 23, up at the top right-hand corner, with revenue being about 21%. And the 0 to 2, which are the meters and greeters, getting the bulk of our transactions. So you see that we're a little bit upside down, and I think wanted to recommend that probably pushing the rate structure, to a different structure will help us kind of manage some of this parking issues that we're currently having. On that side right there, you'll kind of see where we are currently in the gray and what the proposed is. And so you see a little bit of a breakdown from the 0 to 30 minutes is still free, is what we're recommending on the right, in both short-term and long-term. So that does help the meet and greeter, but the ones that are there a little bit longer, taking up those spaces for the traveler, will have a little bit more skin in the game for them. So I think just making these changes to the rate structure will kind of help alleviate some of the meter and greeter, that short time, 0 to 2 hour transactions, or those meet and greeters, for the long-term stayers, which are the travelers. With this rate change that we're proposing or recommending, I wanted to get the commission's feedback, and then if we're okay with it, holding some notices to the public through the website and through our social media through the October 31st and commencing a new rate schedule on November the 1st.
Did you break down out of that 65% transaction base, how many were in the 0 to 30? In other words, how many of those would remain free versus how many of those would turn into a charge?
We broke it down from 0 to 2 hours. We didn't break it down any more than that. So just,
No, I'm saying, right, because you make the change, but if that 65% block is still leaving under 30 minutes, it's not going to generate any revenue. You're going to have the same in and out activity, right? So I was trying to gauge how many people were staying there longer than 30 minutes and would end up getting a charge, which are the ones you want to educate, the ones that maybe,
yeah, I mean, we're looking at revenue at 5% of those 0 to 2 hours. So if we broke that down a little bit, the new rate would give them a $5 charge in the short term and a $5 charge in the long
but
term.
not all of them, not the ones under 30 minutes.
Not the ones under 30
So I was trying to
minutes.
figure out how much of that 0 to 2 hours was in the 30 minutes. In other words, how,
You have that. The other side, how many of the 30 minutes are in the 2 hours?
that's right.
There you go.
Yeah, that's right.
It's probably around 44%.
So close to
Why
half.
not a small charge?
I'm sorry?
Small charge.
No charge, under 30 minutes.
No. Because a lot of people just go in there, they'll take up a space somebody else could have used and they can because somebody's there for 30 minutes.
It's up to the commission.
But Jeremy, isn't the real problem really the long term? Because I keep seeing the notices,
Right.
you know, go to long, I remember the advertising, you know, if the long-term lot is full, use the short term and get a $5 discount, right? To kind of carry it, and of course you have the overflow lot. And I imagine that the rates for the overflow lot are gonna match the long-term lot, right? When the need arises. But I mean, I think the real crux, the real, you know, problem, the rub is that the long-term lot is just not enough space, right?
Well, in part, Commissioner, it's because the short term is not available. And so they're moving over to the long term because we're just not charging enough.
But I haven't seen notices that say the short-term lot is full. I've seen notices that say long-term lot is full. You understand? There's a
Yeah,
difference.
Yeah, but in part, it's because they're not able to park in the short term because we don't have enough stalls. So what we're trying to do, back to Sebi's question is the 0 to 30, we can charge, right? I mean, we can charge if we want to. Those are kind of the people that are dropping off and picking up and being efficient.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
And we don't mind that. We want them to be able to have a good experience. But if somebody is there for an hour or more and he's a greeter, I mean, you're just spending way too much time at the airport. So we either want you to get out or we want you to pay. And so what's happening is in the short term, it's full.
Okay.
And so it's going out to the long term because that's where most travelers are going to park and there just isn't enough stalls.
Okay.
Most people that are gonna travel,
Go to
3
long
days, they're gonna go park over there to save a little bit of money.
And that's 80% of the total revenues.
Yeah.
The 48 to 72 hours are 80% of the total revenue.
Yeah.
So,
Did I explain that right?
I don't-
That's what's happening, is that.
Yeah, that's exactly
We're
what's
trying to
happening.
get them out of the short term so that we've got more stalls and the person that doesn't necessarily have to be in the long term can
Right.
park in the short term.
You know, there's a trick that I can park there for a full hour and I get charged, right?
And I think a lot of people know that after the last 10 years. I think word has gotten out.
I've used it myself just in the last 3 days.
See,
so.
we're trying to take care of you.
It has nothing to do with a fob. It has everything to do with that little kiosk inside.
Yes, it does.
So I don't know, maybe, well, I'll just leave that.
I do agree, keeping it free till 30. Just-
Why are people, what are the greeters? The greeters are people at park.
Picking people up,
Well,
family.
I guess my kids and my wife have never been there to greet me, so.
they're just sending you off.
They send me off and, oh, they're happy.
But it's homework to do.
Would you wanna bring it back?
The proposal looks good to me. I just curious more about the actual breakdown to see how much of a residual benefit we'd actually gain. Because if that entire block was under 30 minutes, then it's gonna be the same, right? But if you're saying it's about half, we'll end up getting a charge.
Yeah, it ends up being about half because of the pay-on-foot station inside as well.
It should alleviate some.
And then just to add there, just putting our rates up to par, added the Harlingen rates over on the left side, just so you can kind of see that. If anything, we've been a little behind on the rates.
I think you're right on the daily max for both short and long term is to obviously be competitive with the other airport rate. And I think if you go up to the $5 on the short term, congratulations, you're deterring people from staying and loitering longer than necessary, right? But it just seems a little steep, especially if a plane is delayed or running late or delayed, like what happened to me. It was delayed 6 hours. I won't say which airline, Delta. Real quick story. I ended up driving to Austin, and the plane I was supposed to be on was still in McAllen at 11:30 p.m., and I was already in Austin at 10. So,
Jeez.
But I think maybe we can come back and revisit just on the max is great. I think you're on point. I think it's how you break it down in terms of the length of period of time that they're actually in the lot. Like for me, for short term, I think $3 is more palpable on the short term lot, and I think on the price on the long term, you're on point.
But we're also trying to build an airport or expand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, why
Right.
would you make long-term cheaper than short-term?
Because it's longer to walk,
Yeah, it is.
further to walk.
No, you were saying the 30 minutes to an hour short-term should be $3, but keep it 5 for
No,
long-term?
no. 30 minutes to $1 should be 3 instead of 5.
But keep long-term at 5 for an hour? In other words, you pay more to walk more.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I said we go with the recommendation and later on revisit the issue of the 65% transactions for zero. Because I think that does have an effect.
I mean, I understand. We don't want to build into a multi-million-dollar parking garage. That's, I don't want to say the phrase, but the kiss of death. I mean, that's just outrageous. I mean, I think it was $40,000 a space. Somebody quote, 50,000. Oh my gosh, it's only been a week.
2 weeks ago.
So, right. So, some of the comments I read on Facebook when the expansion were generally positive, but what I saw over and over was the parking. Like we need something to do about the parking, and this and this, and I understand, and I think this is a really no cost in terms of publishing new rates and getting the information out there to deter it, right, and just kind of prolong and kicking the can a little further down the way. So I don't think there's a need to come back. I think this is good.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much. Then we have executive session.
Do you want to do that now, or do you want to?
Punch?
Yeah, we have like a 12 days of Christmas for me.
Yay! So this meeting is adjourned.
I don't know what to do.
This concludes the workshop of the McAllen City Commission. Workshops are held every second and fourth Monday of the month, convening at 4 p.m. at the McAllen City Commission chamber on the 3rd floor at McAllen City Hall.